thought it would be great if you wouldn't mind educating us a little on what you call the sort of balance between
Sure.
pain and pleasure in our brains and the neurotransmitters that sort of regulate that. I mean, I learned a lot reading about that, and I think it would be very beneficial for people to hear too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, our brains have evolved over millions of years of evolution to approach pleasure and avoid pain. And we do that reflexively without having to give it any thought, even outside of conscious awareness. And indeed, that ability has allowed us to survive over millions of years. What's exciting in neuroscience in the past 75 years or so is the kinds of insights that we've gathered in terms of how that process works, how we actually approach pleasure and avoid pain. And one of the most interesting findings in neuroscience in the last 50 to 75 years or so is that pleasure and pain are co-located in the brain. So the same parts of the brain that process pleasure also process pain, and they work like opposite sides of a balance. So imagine like a beam on a central fulcrum, kind of like a teeter-totter in a kid's playground. And when we experience pleasure, the balance tilts one way, and when we experience pain, it tilts another. But there are several rules governing this balance. And the first and most important rule is that the balance wants to remain level. It doesn't want to be deviated very long to the side of pleasure or pain. And after any deviation from neutrality, which is essentially the biological definition of stress, our brains will work very hard to restore a level balance, or what neuroscientists call homeostasis. And here's the key: the way that our brains go back to the level position after any deviation from neutrality is first by tipping an equal and opposite amount to whatever the initial stimulus was. So, for example, I really like chocolate. When I eat a piece of chocolate, my balance tilts slightly to the side of pleasure. In my brain, in a part of my brain called the reward pathway, our dopamine is released. Dopamine is our reward neurotransmitter. And, I feel good. But no sooner has that happened than my brain adapts to that increased dopamine by actually downregulating my dopamine receptors. And I like to imagine that as these little neuroadaptation gremlins hopping on the pain side of the balance to bring it level again. But the thing about the gremlins is they like it on the balance, so they don't hop off as soon as I've restored neutrality. They stay on until my balance is tipped an equal and opposite amount to the side of pain. And that's that moment of craving another piece of chocolate, right? Now, if I wait long enough, the gremlins hop off, homeostasis is restored, and I kind of move along in my day. But what if I don't stop there? What if I continue to ingest chocolate in larger and larger amounts over days to weeks to months to years? What happens is, then this is the second rule of the balance, with repeated exposure to the same or similar stimulus, that initial deviation to pleasure gets weaker and shorter, but that after response gets stronger and longer. In other words, that little gremlin that hopped on the pain side of the balance originally is now like lifting weights, and he's like turning into a little Arnold Schwarzenegger gremlin, and also more gremlins are piling on, right? And that is what happens when we get into this cycle of addiction, that we end up with enough gremlins on the pain side of the balance to fill this whole room, and they're camped out there. They're not going away, anytime soon. So that even now, in between the times when I'm not using my drug, I'm walking around with the balance tilted to the side of pain. Now I need to use more of the drug, more potent forms of the drug, not even to feel good or get high, but just to restore neutrality and feel normal. And when I'm not using, I'm walking around in a state of pain, experiencing the universal symptoms of withdrawal from any addictive substance, which are anxiety, irritability, insomnia, dysphoria, and intrusive thoughts of my drug, sometimes called craving. And this is, in essence, what happens when people become addicted, or even in the state of sort of minor compulsive overconsumption that we all face now in various forms. The other feature of this phenomenon is that other things lose their salience. So when I've eventually gone into this dopamine deficit state, and it's literally a dopamine deficit state, that we have functional imaging studies showing that, there's a decrease in D2 receptors, a decrease in dopamine transmission in the reward pathway with repeated exposure to highly reinforcing drugs. So when I'm walking around like that, other things, more modest pleasures are no longer pleasurable. Like eating chocolate, for example, really isn't pleasurable for me anymore. Right now, I need to continually up the ante. So that's essentially what's going on in the brain, as we become addicted.